Welcome back to the channel, everyone. I have attempted to record this video a couple times now, and I didn't quite like how it came out. And this is a very sensitive topic, a topic that could very easily get me banned. And so I am very conscious of what I say, and I want to make sure that the message I want to share comes across the right way. So I'm just going to record this again, and I'm just going to go for it. And if I offend anyone, I'm not sorry. I'm just sharing how I see this issue. I'm trying to be as objective as possible. But like I said, this is a very sensitive topic for a lot of people, so it can be hard to be objective. So what I want to dive into today is the return to the land movement. This is a group of basically white people of European heritage and ancestry, who have started a members-only community in Arkansas, and they're actually trying to expand to Missouri, and I think they have a couple other settlements in the works as well. So it's this new, rapidly growing, essentially whites-only organization that is that's being formed, and it's an intentional living community, which those exist all over the country. And I'll share an example of one in a little bit. But it's a group of people who, yes, they are organized based on racial lines, but I don't necessarily buy the argument that it's just racial lines. There's an element of wanting to preserve an identity and a culture in the current, cultural zeitgeist that we're in this country, where being white has become a crime. And this is something I honestly didn't really appreciate or understand until a couple of years ago. If all the critical theory stuff was taught to me in college, I graduated in 2013, so just to give you a timeline, if I learned that stuff in college, I wasn't explicitly aware of it. I'll be totally honest with you. It's not something that was on my radar. I never saw myself as a white person. My identity has always been an American. I've always been an American first. Being a woman has always been important to me. And then I've, over time, have become more cognizant of my socioeconomic class. So those have all been, I would say, like my identity, my core identity components. But being white has never been a part of my identity. It's nothing I've ever seen as a privilege. And it's nothing I've ever, been ashamed of. Like, it is what it is. I can't control it. There's nothing I can do about it. But over the last few years, I mean, George Floyd obviously kicked a lot of this off, but over the last few years, I think this has become a core issue, not just in American politics, but in European politics as well. You're seeing a lot of issues right now in the UK, in particular, where it's not even just like racism. I think a couple of years ago there was definitely some overt racism, but the racism and the migrant crisis are kind of correlated there. So people aren't just being racist because they want to be racist. It's because you have groups of migrants from different countries importing different values, different beliefs, things that are competing with the rule of law in the UK, supplanting the native citizens of that country into secondary status within their own country. There's a lot of issues right with that. So maybe some of those people are racist, but I don't know that they're racist for racism's sake. And so I think a lot of things have become conflated. And in this current postmodern world we're in, I think we're moving out of, the American-led world order and into this new amorphous postmodern world order. But part of this order is deference to ideologies, and especially identity-based ideologies, and we're not having critical conversations about them. It's immediately, if you disagree with whatever the narrative is, you are a racist, xenophobe, misogynist, transphobe. Like you are just an other, and you're not even just an other in the sense that you're an inferior person. You're an other, and you're a bad person. So here's an example of what I'm talking about. So this is an NPR, a local NPR piece published by Little Rock Public Radio, talking about this group in Arkansas. And right from the headline, you can see how they describe them. They're an Arkansas white supremacist group. Now, I'm going to share in a moment an excerpt from a Sky News piece that was shot for these people. A journalist from Sky News went to the group's facilities. I don't even know what you'd call it. Their property. They went to their property in Arkansas and interviewed several of the members and shot film. And nothing about them is white supremacist. If anything, they're like Amish minus, the bonnets and, the horses and the buggies. They're just very, or even they're kind of like the Mormons when the Mormons were building Utah, in the mid 1800s. So I don't see anything necessarily white supremacist about them. They're not wearing white, hats. They're not lynching people. They're not actively trying to hurt people like, you saw in the South, during the 1950s and 60s and whatnot. So to equate this group of people with definitely a bad part of American history, I'm not trying to glorify that at all, but to conflate the two, I think highlights the problem we're facing. You're not a Nazi just because you agree with some of the Trump administration's policies. You're not a fascist because you agree with some of the Trump administration's policies. You're not a white supremacist from wanting to segregate yourself, self-segregate, voluntarily move yourself to a piece of property where you share common bond, common ancestry, common values with a group of people. There's no shame in honestly wanting to leave crime-ridden cities and just go be out in the woods and kind of build your own thing and do your own thing. And, we're seeing a lot of violence now in cities. I'm sure you've probably seen the violence from Cincinnati, racially motivated violence, and so this is happening. So it's not like the racism, it's being portrayed as like this one-way thing with history kind of overlaying it. The assumption is, all white people are evil and they want to be slave masters and then we want to go back to Jim Crow South, and that couldn't be anything from the truth. I think the average person just wants to be left alone and live their lives and raise their kids, and they want safety and security. And right now we live in an operating environment where you can commit crimes, you're not going to go to jail, and then if something happens to you, like you're on the hook. Like, I saw an interview with one of the victims of the violence in Cincinnati, and one of the perpetrators of it had committed crimes before, and she was like, why wasn't this guy in jail? And it's because we have all these soft on crime policies, letting people do whatever they want, not being held accountable. So I don't even see this honestly as racism per se. It's just people are fed up. They're tired and they just want to live their lives in peace. So if you put some rules and boundaries to protect yourself and make it possible for you to live in peace, like I see nothing wrong with that. So my interpretation, that's kind of what this group is doing. Yeah, there's, the racial element to it. But again, I also don't see crime and wanting to preserve an identity and wanting to be around other people. And I will show you in a few moments as well another example that emulates that. But one of the things that really caught my attention in this piece as well is just how this is being framed in the media, and that's really what I want to get at this video. I don't want to defend these people necessarily. I don't want to say that they're evil either. I just want to highlight how this is being framed in the media, how we're looking at it, and how stuff like this is shaping race issues and how we interact with one another in culture. So, right off the bat, something that really bothers me about how this piece is written is she writes, the author, it's a young woman who, her name's Josie, and so she writes, the group was on Sky News back in July talking about preserving their culture, in quotes. So I find offense to that because you wouldn't write that or talk about that with regard to any other community in the United States. America is built on immigrant populations. We're built on people who come to America. We're a melting pot. You come, you bring your culture, but you also assimilate. And so you have a lot of hyphenated Americans. You have Italian Americans, Irish Americans, Polish Americans, Indian Americans, Asian Americans. You have all sorts of different groups of people who have come here. And so you would never see a piece like this published in the news that talks about The group was on Sky News back in July talking about preserving their culture. You wouldn't see culture with reference to Indians, with reference to Koreans or the Irish or Italians or Polish people. Like, you would never suggest that their culture doesn't exist, because we all know that culture does exist. And so what this really gets at is that people who founded America should be ashamed of the founding of America. And this gets to the whole 1619 Project and the idea that America was founded on slavery. Well, hate to break it to you, but slavery was only a minor component of the colonies when it was founded. And the vast majority of the colonies were actually founded on indentured servitude. A lot of that came from Europe and other colonies. Georgia was a penal colony. There was a lot of debtors. Where the prisons in London during the 17th century were just so filled with people that they were shipping them to the New World because they had nowhere else to put them. You also have to keep context in mind that the Protestant Reformation happened. That was a huge, huge deal. Like, up until that time, the Catholic Church had total control of the political environment in Europe, and all of a sudden you have all these heretics coming onto the scene, and they're gaining ground, they're gaining followers, and they're more and more increasingly able, like the Catholic Church could no longer like keep the lid on the heretics. You couldn't just put them, inquisition them. You had to do something about it. And so a lot of them were fleeing Europe for fear of their new religious practice. So they came to the United States seeking refuge to practice their religions. And then, like I said before, there was a lot more indentured servitude or indentured servants in 1619, especially in the South, where slavery was founded because of the economics at the time. So to even just whitewash history and revise American history and say that America was founded on slavery is just grossly inaccurate. And even then, like, you could break it down regionally. Like, the North developed far differently than the South. And again, I'm not defending slavery. It was what was practiced at the time. Okay, so there's context. You have to look at history within context. But America is this country that was founded on so much more than that. You had lots of people who came here with nothing. They founded this country. A lot of them negotiated with Indians who were already here. So they weren't like stealing the land that was being sold to them. You had ones that moved west, so the pioneers that went out west, had no idea what was there. If you haven't been to the plains, let me tell you, it's not hospitable at all. Go to Badlands National Park and try camping there in the middle of August, and then, come back and talk to me. It's just, it's not hospitable by any means. And then you had all these people who were going into the unknown. You did have native tribes who did fight them, who didn't want them on their land. So there were wars and skirmishes and all sorts of things. And it was incredibly dangerous and violent. And so to reduce the history of the people who founded this country, the people who expanded out westward and settled westward, and then the immigrants who came well past slavery. They came, in the mid-19th century. The Irish fled a potato famine, so it was either go to America or starve. Like, I'm not going to fault them for the crimes of a handful of plantation owners in the South. They had nothing to do with it. And even when the Irish came, they were treated like second-class citizens. The Irish were treated like garbage. And so there's this rich history in the United States of people in the West and in Appalachia and urban cities who built this country, made it what it is today. And, some of those people want to be acknowledged for it. I think people in Appalachia would love to celebrate their history. It's very different from the history, say, of the Mormons who founded, Utah and settled out west. And so we just have this rich history in this country. And the fact that we're not allowed to preserve it. We're not allowed to celebrate America. People are taught, young Americans are taught to hate this country. People of European ancestry are taught to be ashamed of themselves. I take a lot of problem with that. And I think it's a gross injustice to what this country is, what this country is founded upon. And so that's why I wanted to make this video, because I think it is important to contextualize and talk about these things and make sure we're checking ourselves and we're keeping an as objective look as we can at what is happening. Otherwise, we are going to let those who believe certain ideologies just completely erase history and erase the people who are the progeny of that history. So I think it's really important. So this is a piece that was covered in NPR, like I said, kind of gives you an idea as to why they lost their funding. I mean, this isn't, calling people who want to build their own community, an intentional community in Arkansas, of all places, Arkansas, white supremacist is just baffling to me. So that is the Return to the Land group. I want to play a clip from the Sky News piece. It was published, it looks like they must have updated it 10 days ago, but it was towards the end of July. So let me play this clip towards the end for you.
Would America be better as a white nation state?
Better in what sense?
Would you prefer, completely blank slate, America?
Also, for context, the first guy that talked, that was on the left here, he is the founder of this community. And then this guy speaking right here with the blue shirt, he is the Sky News journalist who came to interview the group and learn more about this organization.
America is just an ethnically white country.
I would probably feel more comfortable there because I'm white, and that's the way that this country was when my ancestors came here.
You also talk about Hitler in your videos a couple of times when you've talked about people who are waiting around for a new Hitler to come. Mm-hmm. And you said he's not going to show up. You have to do the work for that Hitler to arrive.
Hitler is a very controversial historical figure. I think the mainstream view is one-sided. It's informed by World War II propaganda, but also the contrary position that Hitler did nothing wrong that many people online say, that's also a one-sided view. I think all historical figures are complex, multidimensional, but when I say you're going to have to wait for that new Hitler to arise, I'm not saying you're going to have to wait for a new person to start a new Holocaust. I'm saying you're going to have to wait for a charismatic leader who's going to advocate for your interests, because that's how a lot of people see Hitler.
So I just want to say too, I don't know anything about this guy. I haven't read or seen any of his videos, so I have no idea what he's talking about. But I do know World War II has become quite controversial. Daryl Cooper from the Martyr Made podcast just made a comment about how Winston Churchill isn't the guy we think he is, and he may be to blame for World War II. And people just lit him up. So I'm not defending this guy, but I will say I think there might I studied history in college, and I wasn't even aware of any potential propaganda, but maybe there's something to it. I don't know. But I do think about this for myself. I studied it in college, and I never had a class on Stalin. I never learned about the Holodomor in the Ukraine. I learned a lot about the Holocaust, learned a lot about Hitler, learned a lot about, D-Day, Eisenhower. But there's other aspects of that period of time that, I didn't learn much about. I can't, I've recently started relearning it, but there's not much I learned about the founding of the Soviet Union, the revolution, 1917, 1918, and then the establishment of the Soviet Union, the first 5-year plans, in the 20s, and then, the outbreak of World War II in 1939. So there's just a lot of history that I think is missing from the conversation. So I'm not defending this guy in any means. I have no idea what the context of this is, especially within this interview. But I find it interesting that the Sky News guy brought up Hitler and World War II, and he's talking about the propaganda piece of it, because there's just so much we don't know about the history, and maybe there is some element of we've only been told one side of it, and maybe there's more to learn about World War II. That's all I'm saying. I think there's so much to history that really isn't being taught, and I'm genuinely curious to learn more. I want to learn more about what happened during the Holodomor. I want to learn more about Mao's Great Leap Forward. It's another great example of a major event in history that really isn't, at least at the undergrad level, really isn't covered all that deeply. And maybe I'm biased, I don't remember, back in college, but, it really wasn't talked about. Maybe there was a course about Chinese, diving deeper into Chinese history. I don't remember, but, there's just so much we don't know. So, again, not defending him, but, what do we know? What don't we know? I think there's some curious stuff to think about there.
I'm addressing how they think of Hitler, not my own view.
There are other PMAs, other bits of land that are going ahead.
Yeah, there are 2 other groups, actually 3, organizing. One in Appalachia, one in the Pacific Northwest, and then another one here in Arkansas.
So this is the growing movement.
Right now it's growing very quickly. Yeah, we have applicants every week. I would like to see more communities so that people in all parts of the U.S. have this as an option if they want it. I would also like to see us network and branch out internationally to a greater extent.
Is there anything you want to talk about?
I do want to caveat something that he brought up. He said, we want to grow, we want to expand, we want to make this as an option if people want it. And I think that is the distinction with, white supremacy, Jim Crow South. In the South, in the 40s, 50s, 60s, that was like the de facto way of life. Like the ruling group of people based on, racial lines are so white people in power wanted a white society, and they were using the tools of government to make that happen. So they were using intimidation tactics, violence. Obviously, like the police was on their side, so there wasn't equal rule of law. There was segregation in schools, segregation in all public places. So there's a difference between that and like having a voluntary option. So my understanding of what he's saying is, we're not trying to take over. Like, this group isn't trying to take over. They don't want to go back to that. They want to create intentional communities. And he used an acronym PMA, that's Private Membership Association. So these private groups where if you want to live with other people like you, you can, but no one is forcing you to. And I think that's an important distinction
That I haven't asked about.
I kind of want to ask you, after seeing this, do you think what we're doing is immoral?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah?
Yeah. And that's not, for me, it is morally objectionable. I think the way we've talked about it is, I don't think it is like a country club. That's the difference. I don't think this is sort of free association. I think you are depriving people of a fundamental right to housing. That's how I see this issue. And I think the reason I'm asking those questions about where it goes from here, I think that is a thought experiment, but I think if you replicated it large, I think I would be unhappy with how that looked.
So right off the bat, I think this is the most important piece of this interview, and this is why I wanted to show this clip here. This journalist has come here with an agenda. He had no intention of objectively showing this community or talking about it. He found it morally objectionable and reprehensible. So he already came here with that in mind. And it's interesting because he doesn't say it at this point that it's racism. It's denial of housing. And that's not true. That's not true at all. Like, anyone can go buy a piece of land. They can go establish a community there. They can, do whatever they want on it. I think it would be a deprivation of housing if you're in a high density area, say in Manhattan, where rents are through the roof right now. It's really hard to get access to affordable housing. Let's say you are a building developer, someone like the Trump organization, went in and you bought a bunch of rent-controlled buildings, or you built a bunch of rent-controlled buildings, so you had low rent in these buildings, and then you only were going to give leases to apartments in those buildings to white people, right? That would be an example, in my opinion, of deprivation of housing. This is in the boonies. Like, no one, if you want to live here, go and live here. This is maybe the UK versus US perspective. There is so much land in this country. There are tons of places you can go live. You can go build houses. I think, don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure there's a statistic that there's more cows in Wyoming than people. I've lived in Wyoming. It's beautiful. But, there's plenty of land there. There's tons of abandoned small towns, run down towns. Like, if you want to go find cheap housing, you can go forth and do it. He's assuming that this is going to grow and take over spontaneously, and there's not going to be housing. There will always be access to housing in America. The question is whether or not it's affordable, and then that gets into population density in places like LA and New York. It's not like the UK. Housing in the UK is very different. The UK is an island. There's only so much you can build on, right? And then you obviously have migrants coming in, which is, putting pressure on an already strained housing market. So to come into this interview and suggest that these people are denying housing to other people is just absurd. And I will get to why I think that's the case in just a moment, but let's finish this up.
If it were in my country, and if I were on the receiving end of it.
You think intentional communities shouldn't be able to associate how they like?
Not on the basis of race. And the Arkansas...
Okay, so he does not think that intentional living communities should be able to exist on the basis of race. I would like to introduce you to 3 intentional communities that either deliberately or not do organize on the basis of race. So the first one I want to introduce you to is the Freedom Georgia Initiative. So this is a group of people who purchased a 502-acre plot of land outside of Toomsboro, Georgia, and they are doing the exact same thing the Return to the Land people are doing. They argue that they need a safe place for Black people to go to heal from racial trauma, and that this is a community that is designed for Black families across the African diaspora. So I don't know if the language in their membership agreements or whatever is as explicit as Return to the Land. But my interpretation of this is that if you're a white person, you're not really welcome to this group. So this group, and they were founded in 2020, I believe, right after George Floyd and COVID and all that jazz. But they are, they are a group of people who formed an intentional living community, bought a plot of land, and for whatever reason, this group of people is allowed to organize on the basis of race, and they're not depriving anyone of housing. But when white people do it, they're white supremacists depriving people of housing, and they're evil. I personally think what the problem that folks have with this kind of stuff is this group has failed at establishing their living community. So the group in Arkansas is clearly succeeding. There's high demand, huge wait lists. They are building the infrastructure. They have roads and housing, all that kind of stuff going up. They're going to be expanding. As of 2023, this group in Georgia only has a few settlements that consist of dilapidated campground, and they're trying to establish roads and services, but there are no, as of 2024, construction for permanent dwellings or vital infrastructure has not begun. And as of 2025, it looks like they've deactivated their social media. So this is pretty much a defunct project. So, stuff like this does exist. It's just not being covered in the news. And that's in part because it's not successful. Or, in some cases, it's not conducive to the narrative. But this is literally the exact same thing as Return to the Land, just for Black people. Another example of an intentional living community that I want to introduce you to is Chocolate City, which is a residence hall at MIT. I am shocked that they call it Chocolate City. I find that offensive. I don't know about you. I find that offensive. The point of Chocolate City is a brotherhood of MIT students and alumni who identify with urban culture and share common interests or experiences. Okay, so kind of similar, not necessarily, again, explicitly racist in this case, but the idea here is this is for Black college students at MIT to live here and celebrate their shared culture. So if urban culture is allowed to exist, why isn't, an ethnic European American heritage culture allowed to exist, right? So this gets back to the whole idea of culture. So this culture is okay, but when white people do it, it's not. And so I interpret this as, again, it's maybe not explicitly for Black people, but if you're a white person, I don't know that you would be welcome in this community. If you look, how many white people do you see here? It's designed for a specific purpose and specific group of people. It might not be explicitly racist, but in practice it is. And the third one I want to introduce you to is an actual intentional living community. This is called Earth Haven Eco Village. This is outside of Asheville, North Carolina. And these people are trying to live more sustainably. You have to apply to get into this community. There is a wait list. It is quite difficult. I do know some people have tried to get in. It's quite difficult to get in. There are certain requirements. So if you have a dog, for example, they are not a dog-friendly community, so you will not be allowed to live there if you have a dog. But I just want to just highlight this this picture for you for a second. Just take a moment and what do you see? There's a lot of white faces, aren't there? And what isn't being talked about is within intentional living communities, within homeowners associations, within gated communities, they are de facto racist, okay? And they might not say it, they may not be explicit about it, but these are communities designed for white people, right? And if that were not the case, you would see more diversity in their ranks. It's 2025. DEI has been in full swing for years now. There's all these DEI consultants and experts out there. There is no reason why you couldn't look around your group and say, hey, there's way too many white faces here. Let's increase the diversity a bit and figure out a way to do that. And so part of the problem is, communities like this self-segregate, and they might end up falling on, racial lines. Maybe, 90% of the applicants for this community are white people. Therefore, the representation skews more white. And so I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with that. It's just kind of how things go. But again, to say that a group of people in Arkansas can't have an intentional living community based on shared culture, shared identity, an identity that is based on European heritage, which in and of itself is going to be a racial community. You can't have that, but you can have other communities like this that are de facto racist. I have questions. Why is something like this allowed to exist? This is okay, but other communities are not. So those are 3 examples of communities where you have to check a certain box, you have to meet certain criteria to join. Some of these communities are explicitly race-based, some are implicitly race-based, and some are just de facto, they just become race-based. And, just to close, I'll bring you to the Return to the Land website. I haven't dove into their social media accounts and channels. So if there's something that they have said that is explicitly racist, I've heard they've said certain things, please share it in the comments, fact check and provide a community note or whatever to this. I'm just going off what's on their website, and it talks about people who are members, groups of our members form European heritage communities. So if you wanted to be racist, you wouldn't use that language. You would use more derogatory language, in my opinion. It just, again, I'm just reading what they've written here, but they want to promote strong families and common ancestry. They want to facilitate economic and social harmony between all groups and individuals in their movement. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with that inherently. We can have a conversation about should it be racist or not? But then again, how do you allow this to exist and accept this type of community to exist, but not the Return to the Land? That's where I have a problem, right? If we're going to apply racism, you have to apply it both ways. You can't give the perceived victim class a pass and then allow them to do the things that then are being criminalized by other groups of people. So that's kind of where I take issue with, and where within the media in particular, when you have, stuff like the Sky News piece, and then you have, this where they talk about white supremacist group, you could have easily said, Arkansas intentional living community draws international attention, right? Like, you didn't have to use the white supremacist headline. You could have used anything else in there, but they deliberately chose to. And I think that's part of the problem, and why we're struggling as a country. And I think we need to get past the racial stuff. I think it's really distracting, and it causes more problems than it solves them. So that's what I have for you. Again, like, if you found anything I said to be offensive, I'm not sorry. Like, I'm, working through understanding what's happening in our country, where we're going, trying to understand the fault lines. I use history as a lens through which to do this. And because I'm seeing how history is being revised and being rewritten in real time, that has become increasingly hard to do. It's hard to trust the history we've been taught and the narratives that have come from the past that currently shape the present. So this is very complex. There's a lot to unpack here, a lot to dive into. I'm not perfect by any means. And, I have lots of things to learn. So if there's something I said that you think I should learn more about, please encourage me to learn more about it. But yeah, I think we just need to have conversations like this. And that's my goal here, is to share a perspective and have a conversation about it, and, go from there. So if you like this video and found it valuable, I would love it if you would like and subscribe. I suspect this is probably going to be deranked in the Google YouTube algorithm. So share it with a friend too if you found it useful. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.